Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. The Kite Runner is the topic of this video, and more specifically the characters of the novel. This video is going to be useful for students that are studying the novel for any course at any level, but I have perhaps put particular focus on students that are studying the political and social protest writing module for A-level English literature. But that's not to say this video won't be useful if you're not studying that particular module. So the aim of this video is to tell you really who the characters are, their relationships with each other, and why that character might be significant in the novel. You might, for example, get a question about a specific character in the exam, particularly if you're studying the Political and Social Protest Writing module with AQA, that's section B, paper 2, you might be asked about a specific character. So it's useful to know who the characters are and why they're significant. So let's get going. So you can see that I've done this video in terms of jigsaw pieces, and I wanted to really emphasize the way in which characters are connected to each other, because whenever you have a novel like this, which has quite a few characters in it, there's going to be relationships between characters and reasons why characters are connected to one another. So you can see here we have a cluster of characters, and I will eventually talk about all the characters in this novel. But in the boxes around the outside, you can see why that character might be particularly significant. So let's start with Sofia. Sofia is Amir's mother, and she used to teach in the university, and she used to teach literature. And if you think about the novel, towards the end of the novel, when Amir has gone back to Kabul, he bumps into Dr. Razul in the street, who used to be a professor, I believe, of literature, who has now been reduced to a beggar because of the tumultuous political kind of backdrop of Afghanistan. Sofia remains mainly unknown in this novel. Even Amir doesn't know much about her either. We are told, though, in the beginning that Baba, who married Sofia, that she was a swap meet princess. She hailed from royalty. And we also know that she died giving birth to Amir. And that is the reason, perhaps, why Baba sits Amir down on his lap at the beginning of the novel and accuses Amir of theft. It's believed at that time that the theft is the death of his wife, which he holds Amir responsible for. So he's stolen his wife from him. So other than that, Sofia, obviously because she's not alive, she doesn't really feature, but we do get some minor details about her. Ali, at the bottom here, is Baba's servant, but he's also more than that. He's also Baba's friend. And Baba and Ali have grown up together because of Ali's circumstance. So Ali's parents were murdered, I think, when Ali was 5 years old. And as a result of that, Baba's family took in Ali. So the two have grown up together. And what's interesting is that Baba and Ali grew up together in the same way that Amir and Hassan grew up together. One is Hazara, one is Pashtun. And what's also interesting is that just like Amir betrays Hassan, Baba also betrays Ali. So despite Amir and Baba being both superior Pashtun in the context of Afghanistan, they are both responsible for betraying their closest friend and ally. So it's almost cyclical. We learn that Ali is semi-paralysed and suffers from a bad leg. He can't walk properly, and he's also taunted by adults and children in the early chapters because of his facial paralysis as well. Probably because of Ali's Hazara ethnicity, he's illiterate, just like Hassan is at the beginning. And again, that shows the inequality in Afghanistan, the fact that you have characters that grow up to be illiterate because they are reduced to just being servants. And Ali lived in a modest little mud hut, which juxtaposes, of course, with Baba's mansion, which is described and contrasted in chapter 2. Ali, of course, we don't see Ali or Hassan after chapter 9, when the two of them leave Baba's house. And Ali then gets killed by a landmine in the future, by which time Amir and Baba have emigrated to the US. So we don't see Ali again after chapter 9. Baba, in the red box here, is a proud Pashtun, and as we've said, he's connected to Ali here because he's obviously Ali's friend and servant. We believe initially that Baba is actually quite a bad father. We regard him as being quite dismissive. We regard him as being quite neglectful. He doesn't have much tact. He doesn't seem to be able to engage with a young Amir very well at all. And that not only is because perhaps of the death of Sofia, his wife, which he holds Amir perhaps accountable for, but it's also because Amir lacks the masculine traits that Baba believes young men and young boys should have, like football and competition and politics and business and all those kind of stereotypically macho kind of hobbies. As the novel progresses, though, his relationship with Amir does begin to thaw. So by the time they get to America, in chapter 10, for example, Baba is much more, their relationship has thawed a little bit, and perhaps that's because Baba relies on Amir to understand and survive in America because of that sense of culture shock. And one of the reasons that Baba leaves Afghanistan and the Middle East is because of Amir. Baba suffers culture shock, which means he struggles to acclimatise to American culture when he lands in America. There's that scene in the Newans shop, for example, where he was just asked for ID and he takes it personally because in Afghanistan they can use a stick. It was almost like a credit card. And Baba, of course, was a quite industrious, entrepreneurial character when he was in Afghanistan. He set up numerous different businesses. He built an orphanage, so he had wealth. And what's ironic about this, of course, is that when he left Afghanistan to America, he couldn't take any of it with him. So when he gets to America, he settles in this kind of mundane petrol station job, where his job is to fill people's cars with fuel. And that goes to show, I suppose, the reality of the immigrant experience, that sometimes when immigrants do come to a different country, no matter that country's wealth, they do sometimes have to settle for quite medial, poor standards of jobs. So he doesn't have any health insurance, for example, so he gets quite poorly by breathing in those fumes all the time. And there's a sense that he's exploited while he works, long hours. We do know, of course, that he dies of lung cancer. He gets diagnosed pretty soon after arriving in America, and he refuses treatment because he's quite a proud man. He doesn't want to be seen as a victim. And linked to that, he also refuses food stamps, which is a form of welfare in America, where the government can supplement your food bill. So he's quite a proud man. He doesn't want to have state handouts. The bombshell, of course, that we have later in the novel is that he's actually Hassan's father. And that has been kept from Hassan. It's also been kept from Amir. Rahim Khan knew, but Ali didn't know. So what's happened here is that Baba has slept with Ali's wife, Sanibar, behind Ali's back. And that's the betrayal. And the reason why Baba could not acknowledge that openly is because of the shame that would have brought to his Pashtun heritage. So Baba is used as a device to show the failure and hypocrisy of the powerful elite, that despite his wealth, despite his popularity, he is still flawed. And in the letter that Rahim Khan writes Amir towards the end of the novel, it's explained that Baba was quite harsh on Amir because it was Baba's way of almost venting his frustration at himself for not being able to acknowledge Hassan as his own son in public. And that makes sense because when we look back at the earlier chapters, Baba, for example, gives them each equal pocket money. Baba spends money on having the operation on Hassan's lip. And you think, well, why would he do that? Why would this Pashtun man spend his own money on a Hazara servant child? And obviously it becomes clear why. So those are the relationships between those characters there. Of course, I'm not probably giving you all of the information, but I'm giving you perhaps the main points. Talking about Sanibar then. So Sanibar, as we already mentioned, is Hassan's mother. And she runs off about a week after Hassan is born. We're told that she runs off with a clan of travelling dancers. And it's believed and it's implied that Sanibar is quite an irredeemable character. She's almost framed as being quite dislikable in the opening chapters. She, for example, joined in the taunting of Ali because of his facial paralysis. She was quite mean to Ali. She also was obviously quite mean to Hassan for leaving him as a week-old newborn. So she's regarded as quite a almost terrible character in the beginning. But halfway through the novel, through Rahim Khan's testimony, we're told that she suddenly reappears again to seek redemption, and that reinforces one of the main themes of this novel, which is characters' quest for redemption and forgiveness. So many years after she abandoned Hassan, she rocks up at the family door again. And because of Hassan's temperament, he forgives her relatively quickly. And before she dies, Sanibar and Hassan have about 4 years of a really good relationship, actually. And in those 4 years, she meets Sorab, Hassan's son, and Sorab and Sanibar have a really nice grandson-grandmother relationship. When she does turn up, though, back at Hassan's door in the middle of the letter, which Rahim Khan tells us, she has been assaulted terribly. Somebody has taken some kind of knife to her face, and I think it even stabbed through one of her eyes. So she comes back with terrible injuries. She recovers from that as best she can, but that again shows the treatment of women in this novel, which could be another significant theme, the way in which despite having few female characters, most of them at some point or another are oppressed at the hands of some kind of violence or mistreatment. And Sanibar dies within the novel. Obviously, Baba is related to Sanibar because he fathered Hassan with her illegitimately, so that's why she's connected to Baba here. Hassan is, of course, I would argue, the main character of the novel, which is interesting because he's not the narrator. Maybe the reason why he couldn't have been the narrator is because he was illiterate, so perhaps Hassini couldn't frame things from his perspective. He chose to use Amir as a storyteller. But Hassan arguably is who the novel is named after, the Kite Runner, the meaning one, the definite article. So Hassan, of course, when they do have those kite flying tournaments, he's the one that does the physical athletic running. Amir is too slow. So I believe that Hassan is the kite runner here. And he's a servant child. He's from the Hazara heritage. And one of the things that we learn about him very soon, which we see time and time and time again in this novel, is his unwavering loyalty. And also courage, that despite him being an inferior group that's often persecuted in this society of Afghanistan, he does more than once stand up for himself or stand up for Amir. So he's loyal and brave, and he sacrifices himself, of course, in the rape in chapter 7 by rescuing Amir's kite. In other words, he would rather accept a punishment like that than give Asef the kite. That's how loyal he is to Amir. During that rape scene in chapter 7, Amir likens him to the look of a lamb, and of course lambs are sacrificial creatures. And during another flashback at that time, there's also a flashback to the Eid festival where the sheep is slaughtered. And Amir is linking the look of acceptance in the sheep's eyes to Hassan's appearance just before that rape. Hassan is also illiterate, at least in the beginning. He does learn to read later. And that allows Amir to have some power because he manipulates Hassan by giving him the wrong definitions of words. What's interesting, though, about that storytelling scene is that despite Hassan being illiterate, he's not stupid by any accounts. He's able to tell Amir about a plot hole in one of the earliest stories that Amir wrote. So he's logical. He's quite a logical thinker, despite not being able to understand or read symbols on a page. And he is I think he is the first character, in fact, that encourages Amir to write stories because of the praise that he gives Amir. Amir was hoping to taunt Hassan by veering off the normal story without Hassan knowing, as a form of teasing. But Hassan actually says that was a better story, the best he's ever heard. So it's actually, ironically, Hassan's encouragement that makes Amir pursue writing on a more full-time basis. However, despite Hassan's unwavering loyalty, unfortunately, following the rape, and because of Amir's own psychological turmoil, Amir sees fit to frame Hassan by hiding money and a watch, I believe, under the mattress. And that is what means that Hassan and Ali leave the compound, leave the mansion. Later on in the novel, we learn that he married Fazana and had Sorab after he had a stillborn daughter. And he does forgive Sanibar for her errors in the past. Unfortunately, though, he does get executed by the Taliban. The reason for that is the Taliban believe a Hazara family is trespassing in a mansion that belongs to a Pashtun, which of course was not the case. Hassan tried to stick up for himself and the truth, but he was executed in cold blood, as was Fazana. And that's important for two reasons. The first is because it prevents Amir from seeking redemption and forgiveness directly from Hassan. But the second is because it makes Sorab an orphan. And that really is what the second half of the novel is about, a quest narrative to try and rescue Sorab, which is ultimately successful. The slingshot that Hassan has is a key motif. The slingshot is representative of justice and fairness, and it's also cyclical because Sorab also has a slingshot later, which is used to defend Amir against Asef in that fight scene. And then we obviously have Hassan's son Sorab, who is not just a Hazara orphan, he is Amir's half-nephew, and by the end of the novel, in fact, the only blood relative that Amir has left, because everyone else has died. In the end, he is adopted by Amir and Soraya in America, suggesting that the inability to have children has been remedied to some extent. And there is an idea that by adopting Sorab, that Amir has sought forgiveness from Hassan as best he can. Sorab, though, does have quite a tragic story to him. It's implied, obviously he's an orphan, which is bad enough, but it's implied that he was sexually abused by Taliban leaders, and he says that he feels dirty in a very poignant conversation that he has with Amir outside the mosque. And Sorab, again, demonstrating the courageousness that he has by defending Amir against Asef by shooting Asef in the eye. So whereas in chapter 5 Hassan only threatened using the slingshot, which worked, now Sorab has actually had to use the slingshot. So there's something cyclical and something that links chapter 5 and I think chapter 22, the fight scene, together. In the end of the at the end of the novel, chapter 25, we don't have the happy ever after that we expect straight away, because actually the beginning of chapter 5 is about Sorab's attempted suicide. And the reason why he attempts suicide is because Amir foolishly promised Sorab that he would not ever have to go back into an orphanage. And because of the bureaucratic nightmare surrounding taking Afghan children back to America, for example, proving that they're legally orphans, Amir has to renege on that promise, and that prompts Sorab to attempt to take his own life. He survives, they're back in hospital, and once they go back to America, Sorab is actually selective mute as a form of trauma. There's a sense at the end that Sorab will be okay, but we don't see it fully within the frame of the last chapter. It's kind of an implied meaning that he will be okay, because obviously America is a lot safer than Afghanistan under Taliban rule. That scene where he appears with bows around his ankles goes to show the extent to which he's being exploited, and the way in which Asef touches him goes to show again that sense of sexual manipulation as well. So the way Asef touches, the body language there, Sorab, is really quite uncomfortable and quite disgusting, really. But that goes to show the abuse that's happening to children in Afghanistan during the rule of the Taliban, which obviously goes to show the hypocrisy of the Taliban, who is quite happy to stone people to death and sexually abuse children, but ban things like music and kite flying. You think they've got their priorities a bit screwed on or wrong there. Moving on, we have the connection between Rahim Khan and Amir, and the reason why they're connected, of course, is because Rahim Khan proves to be a bit of a surrogate father to Amir, much more supportive in the earlier chapters than Baba ever was. For example, the praise regarding writing stories. And it's really important that we appreciate that Rahim Khan is the catalyst for bringing Amir back to the Middle East, first to Pakistan and then to Afghanistan, to find Sorab, because Rahim Khan is dying, and it's Rahim Khan, through that telephone call in chapter 1 and chapter 14, that we learn what's gone on to Hassan. So Rahim Khan actually is the fount of all knowledge in this novel. He answers a lot of questions for us about what's happened to Hassan after chapter 9, what happened, and he also is the owner of the phrase "there is a way to be good again," which is a phrase that's repeated throughout the novel, which reinforces the idea of redemption. It's implied, and I think it's said to us explicitly in the letter at the end of the novel, that Rahim Khan knew about the rape all along, Hassan's rape all along. And in chapter 16, he actually becomes the narrator of that chapter, as he tells us everything that he knows that's happened since Baba and Amir left for America. We have lots of questions in terms of what's happened in Amir's absence. You could argue, though, that he's also responsible for Hassan's execution, because he was the one that brought Hassan back from the village where he was living around Bamiyan back to Kabul. And that's where he was obviously executed. So Rahim Khan was getting poorly. He couldn't look after Baba's house anymore. He asked Hassan to help him out, which he agreed to, because obviously he's very loyal. And you could argue that actually leads to Hassan and Fazana's deaths. He dies kind of within the context of the novel. And he also lies and says there's a Ron and Betty Caldwell who would be happy to adopt Sorab, and obviously they don't exist, which means that Amir is actually stuck with Sorab at the end. So Rahim Khan is quite an important character in terms of the way in which the novel works. We need him for the telephone call, for example, and to tell us all about what happened to Hassan. And then we have the Tahiris, who come into Amir's life because Amir falls in love with Soraya. So Soraya becomes Amir's wife. They meet at the flea market. And Soraya has a past. She ran away with an Afghan man. Sorry, she ran away with a man from Virginia when she was 18. And she suffered harsh consequences, both physically and emotionally. Physically, she was forced to cut off all her hair by her father as a punishment. And emotionally, because she had to suffer the damage to her reputation and gossip. And one of the reasons why Jamila Tahiri, her mother, is so worried that she won't ever marry is because of this quite acerbic gossip that means that no suitors will come to Soraya's door. She's viewed as damaged goods, in other words. And Hosseini uses her, as he does with all female characters to some extent, to show the double standards in society, particularly Afghan society. How men, for example, can sleep around and never have any harm to their reputation. It's just part of the macho culture. Whereas women have to bear the consequences in a much more vivid way. Soraya, for whatever reason we don't actually know, is unable to have children. And interestingly, she also wants to become, and she eventually does become, a teacher. Her father doesn't like that, General Tahiri. But it's interesting because Soraya tells us that she helped teach a girl called Zeba to read. She taught the child the alphabet, and she said it was one of the most rewarding experiences that she's ever had to help teach a child to read. Ironically, of course, Amir did have the capacity and he did have the power to teach Hassan to read, but he chose not to, and instead he used his intellect as a way to tease Hassan. So there's an interesting double standard there between the two of them regarding education and reading. And we have her father, General Iqbal Tahiri, who is a very proud Pashtun, and that is demonstrated through the focus he places on lineage and heritage and pride and honour, or Nang and Namus as they're called in this novel. He's also relatively dominant and threatening, and he's also quite antagonistic within the small world, the microcosm of this kind of cluster of characters. Amir kind of falls in love with her at first sight, his daughter, and General Tahiri is a bit suspicious, and he says to Amir in the flea market, just to let you know, if you do anything wrong, people will tell me about it. So he's actually quite a domineering father figure. He's responsible for, you could argue, oppressing his wife into marriage. He tells her that she cannot sing in public. We learn that he's on antidepressants. Towards the end of the novel, General Iqbal Tahiri is seen as quite tactless, because once Sorab and Amir are back in America, during a meal they have in the apartment, General Tahiri says, "Why did you rescue this Hazara boy? Why this Hazara?" And Amir, finally having a backbone, says, "You will never, in my presence, call him as a Hazara again. He has a name and it's Sorab," suggesting Amir's ability to courageously defeat this kind of domineering father figure. And that kind of conversation only goes to show the ethnic divisions that are still, around, and how the ethnic divisions in the large world can infiltrate into the small world and the relationships. He acts as a foil towards Baba, whereas Baba does not want to have government welfare. General Tahiri does. So the two characters, the two male proud Pashtuns, are kind of conflicted there. Finally, his wife, Jamila, at the top there, is oppressed. She's prohibited from singing publicly, as I've already said. She also is a bit of a hypochondriac, which means that she always has something wrong with her health-wise. But she's actually quite a lovely woman, and quite an endearing character to Amir. She's very thankful to Amir because she got rid of her fear that her daughter would never marry. So she becomes actually quite a lovely mother-in-law figure. And again, it goes to show how Hosseini is using a female character to show a degree of oppression, particularly in the marriage to her husband. So she's not particularly a main character, but you might want to talk about her if you get a question about the treatment of women in the novel. Moving on. Of course, we've got Amir here, and I've connected him with Asef. I'll talk about Asef in the next slide. But Amir is our narrator. He's the son of a wealthy Pashtun. He lives in a mansion and is very literate. And he can use, as we've already said, his intellect manipulatively, which is not an easy adverb to actually say. He has a fractured relationship with Baba in the beginning because he's not typically manly or macho. He's not interested in sports and fighting. He gets car sick a lot. He gets upset easily, and so on. He's made to feel guilty for the death of his mother in childbirth, and he's then also conflicted for pretty much the whole middle of the novel with the guilt of what happened to Hassan, not being able to stop it. He did nothing. And he did nothing probably because he valued the kite over his friend Hassan. So he feels disgusted with himself as he grows older that his loyalties were completely wrong. He then makes things worse because despite not stopping the rape, he can't then deal with the guilt of that, and he has to get rid of Hassan out of the house. And he chooses to do that through framing Hassan with the mattress, hiding the stuff under the mattress. And Ali and Hassan leave, and we never see them alive again. What Amir wants is he wants to move on. He wants to bury the past, and that's what he says in the chapter 1. And America allows him to do that. That change in setting, that fresh start, allows him to kind of conveniently forget about the wrongs of the past, which he leaves behind in the Middle East. I would argue, though, that I don't think he betrays Hassan mainly through failing to stop the rape, because we have to remember that he was 12 or so, which is still relatively young. I think he betrays Hassan more through the framing. And the reason, of course, Hassan says, yes, I did steal the money or the watch, was because everybody knew Hassan didn't lie. So if Hassan said, no, I didn't, they would know that Amir was responsible. So it's another act of sacrifice on Hassan's part there to admit something he didn't actually do. He wins the kite tournament in chapter 7, but he wins it because of Hassan's help, because it's Hassan who goes to run after the kite, which is kind of the second half of the tournament. You're supposed to run and get your rival's kite and display it on the mantelpiece as a sign of honour. Amir can't do that because he's too slow and clumsy, but Hassan has the athleticism to do it. He escapes as a political refugee, which is autobiographically exactly what Hosseini did with his father in the 80s. So again, there is an autobiographical significance here to the author. And they escape to the USA. And Amir, America offers Amir the chance to better himself. He becomes a published novelist in America. He finds a wife. He graduates from high school and college and university. So America offers Amir a chance, which often is the reason why people emigrate to other countries, because their own homeland where they would like to stay cannot offer them the opportunity or the safety that they wish. He receives the phone call, as we've said in chapter 1, from Rahim Khan, and he goes back. He doesn't just go back to see Rahim Khan, he goes back to seek redemption, to right the wrongs of the past. He's a published novelist, which again is clearly a link to Hosseini. Interesting that Hosseini has chosen to write a novel about a novelist. So again, there's that kind of framing there. And eventually they adopt Sorab at the end. Interestingly, Amir would have been killed had it not been for Sorab using the slingshot. So again, Amir is only alive because of Sorab's actions with the slingshot. In terms of the narrative, we have to remember that Amir is an unreliable narrator. He's a first-person homodiegetic narrator, which inevitably is going to be biased. Every first-person narrator is biased to some extent because it's to do with a limited perspective. So if you are a Pashtun, your perception of the world and society and your opportunity is going to be very different to Hassan's, for example. So Amir is never very good at describing the perceptions of Hassan or Ali. So it's always interesting to think about how an oppressed character might have a different version of events than Amir. And of course, a lot of Amir's narrative is impacted by the guilt and his lies and deceit. The other character on this slide is Fazana, who is Hassan's wife. We don't know much about her other than the fact that she gave birth to a stillborn daughter and then gave birth to Sorab, I think, a year later. And she's murdered and executed along with Hassan by Taliban officials. And that goes to show, again, the oppression of female characters, but also how the Taliban is not differentiating between women and men. You have that kind of phrase to do with war, which is women and children first, as in women and children should be protected first. But the Taliban is just not interested, and they're happy to kill anyone that moves. So Fazana, again, another character that shows the oppression of women. And even though she's not a main character, but also the Afghan female refugee in the back of the pickup truck that the Russian soldier wants to rape in chapter 10, I think, chapter 9 or 10, again is another character that shows the oppression of women at the hands of somebody more powerful, and she's the one that Baba protects, if you remember. Then we have the three the three idiots in this novel, really, the three lunatics. We have Asef, Wali and Kamal. Asef, of course, is a lot worse than Wali and Kamal. If I talk about Wali and Kamal first, I might call them idiots, but they're definitely responsible to some extent for the suffering of others. But again, they might lack the power to actually go against Asef because they're terrified. They're described as being Asef's disciples, which is interesting because that's usually a word that has religious connotations, meaning that they're kind of following some kind of godlike figure. And obviously God is supposed to be a good character. Jesus is supposed to be quite a sacrificial character, and Asef is the complete opposite. The only thing we know about Wali is that he held Hassan down during the rape in chapter 7. But we don't know any more about him. The only thing we know about Kamal other than that is that Kamal died after getting out the fuel tanker, probably because of suffocation, and that prompts his father to also commit suicide by shooting himself in the mouth. So quite bleak there at the end, I think, of chapter 9. So yes, we can call these kind of the antagonists of the novel, but there are some elements that make Wali and Kamal, particularly Kamal, perhaps more sympathetic characters, although in a court of law, the prosecuting attorney might want to imprison all of these people for rape because they were accessories to the crime. And in some legal terms, they would also be as guilty as the actual rapist. So they're not particularly redeeming characters at all. And I think one of the reasons why Kamal is killed off is because it allows Amir to kind of, again, leave the baggage of the past in Afghanistan. Kind of the suffering of Afghanistan is left behind, paving the way for America. Asef might be an awful character, but he's actually a very good character to analyse in the purpose of literature study. In the small world, in the beginning of the novel, he represents a threat to their childhood, so he's the small world bully. For example, in chapter 5, when we meet him for the first time, he threatens Amir and Hassan with the steel knuckles. He accuses Amir of being responsible for being friends with a Hassan, with a Hazara. And in the birthday party, of course, he gives Amir a present of Hitler's biography, which again shows his loyalty to extreme far-right regimes. It's no wonder, therefore, if that's the kind of child you're dealing with and that kind of warped thinking, that he's going to be the perfect candidate to join the Taliban. You cannot be a Nazi and also disagree with the rule of the Taliban. You're going to have to support it because it's the same idea of making a utopia based on, in effect, ridding the place of a particular problem. And in this case, it's Hazaras, in the same way that for Hitler it was the Jews. So by supporting Hitler, of course, and he admits it later on, Asef is a supporter of ethnic cleansing, which is what the Holocaust was for, and what the massacre in 1998 was for, when the Taliban went from house to house killing Hazaras. So, in other words, to sum that up, his behaviour as a child in the early chapters foreshadows his later involvement in the Taliban. Both of those states, both childhood and adulthood, recreate this theme of dystopia, and how Asef is so transfixed on creating a utopian state, he actually forgets the fact that he's making the place worse. As I'm saying this, I would really like, people that are far-right extreme nutters to watch this video. Maybe they might get a bit educated by it. Anyway, Asef disappears between chapter 8 and chapter 21 or 2. He rapes, obviously, Hassan, and he also sexually abuses Sorab, it's implied. So it goes to show how, in this dystopian world of the Taliban, and with Asef as a character, how sexual abuse is used as a weapon across multiple different characters. Asef leads the stoning at the Ghazi Stadium, and of course what far-right extreme theocracies do, like the Taliban, is they will corrupt religion in order to suit their own extremist rules. So if you have somebody that says, God is on my side, God is supporting me doing this, extremist nutters are going to be more likely to do it. And as long as they have convinced themselves that God and Islam is supporting their Sharia law, then they are going to do it, feeling like they have a legitimacy to do it. It's part of them doing a public show of education. They want people to see the stoning, to show what will happen to you if you go against God's word. Of course, there is going to be a degree of hypocrisy because the Taliban have banned music, and one of the things that Asef wants Sorab to do is dance to music. So there's a hypocrisy there. Asef has Sorab at his compound just before the fight scene, and Asef, of course, at the end of that fight is defeated, at least, or weakened, by having his eye shot out by a small ball that Sorab uses from a slingshot. And it's interesting why the eye. The eye is often seen as the symbol of the soul, or eyes to the soul, window to the soul. And of course, Asef is soulless. He has no soul. You can't have a soul if you're willing to kill people, basically. It's as simple as that. And it's interesting because at the stadium, he was also described as wearing sunglasses, which of course prevents you from seeing the eyes. Your teachers would not like you wearing sunglasses in class because it would either be seen as rude, but also quite inhumane almost, because the teacher would not be able to see your eyes. So Asef might be a terrible lunatic sociopath, but he's also very interesting to analyse from a character perspective in literature. Sometimes the evil characters are the ones that make the best characters to talk about, ironically. Arguably, and this is perhaps a long shot, you do get some students that feel a small, and I mean very small, amount of sympathy for Asef because he's been radicalised. Asef is a great character to debate, where does evil come from? Is it nature or nurture? So has Asef been made evil, or was Asef made evil? If he has learned to be evil, Who is therefore responsible for that? And if so, has he been radicalized? But that's just an open-ended kind of interpretation. That's for you to agree or disagree with as you see fit. And then we have some of the minor characters. Dr. Razzle is the former colleague of Sofia, the university lecturer. And he goes to show that it doesn't matter what your level of intellect, you can still be made a victim of war because of the Taliban's rules. Farid becomes Amir's sidekick as they drive around Afghanistan trying to find Sorab. Initially, Farid is quite angry or suspicious of Amir because he regards Amir to be a bit of a traitor for leaving his homeland at the first sign of trouble when other people just stayed behind and had to. He's accused of being a tourist in his own country. But after Farid learns the real reason why Amir is back in Afghanistan, they end up being good friends. Farid and Zaman are connected because Zaman is the orphanage owner, and Farid and Zaman have a bit of a scuffle because Farid believes that Zaman is selling children to the Taliban. So Zaman is the orphanage owner, and he's actually spent pretty much all of his life savings trying to protect and look after other people's children, i.e. orphans. And what Zaman says is he has to allow the Taliban to take one child, because if he doesn't, they will take 10. And it's the Taliban that supplies the orphanage with food. It might be pretty crappy food, but they do supply the orphanage with food. So it's almost a perverse exchange of a child for some rice. But Zaman really has no choice. Zaman is also pretty important for I would argue, one of the key quotes of the whole novel, which is the orphanage in Afghanistan has ample supply of children who have lost their childhood. And again, that goes to show the impact of war on innocence and that corruption of childhood. So Zaman is actually quite interesting in terms of Afghanistan's treatment of children. Also on this slide, we have Wahid, who is Farid's brother. That's why they're connected. And Amir stays with Wahid for one night before going back to Kabul. And Wahid's children keep looking at Amir's wrist, he believes. And that's why Amir gives the children his watch as a present. However, it materializes that the children quickly lose interest in that watch. They're not interested in the watch. They probably can't even tell the time, because why would they? But they actually are looking at not Amir's wrist, they're looking at the food he's eating, which goes to show that Wahid has sacrificed his children having food for the sake of their guest, Amir. So the children are going hungry. So he's actually quite a kind character in a way. Then we have the doctors, as you can see on the left-hand side. Again, not that relevant, but I wanted to include them anyway. You have the Newans, who own the shop in the US where Baba has a bit of a tantrum. It also goes to show, of course, I think they're from China, the Newans, and it goes to show again how America can often be the home to many immigrants, which is what America is based on. It's based on mass immigration. It's what American society is. And you have also Raymond Andrews, who is the legal specialist who helps, or doesn't, as the case may be, Amir figure out how on earth he's going to get Sorab back to America. He's not that helpful. He actually comes across as very pessimistic and miserable, but afterwards we're forced to recalculate our perceptions of him because it materializes that his daughter has recently committed suicide, and the way in which he tends to those tomato plants perhaps is a form of mourning, because he's wanting something to nurture now that his daughter has died. So Raymond Andrews initially is not particularly helpful, but then we're kind of asked to look again at him and to see him as a more sympathetic character, perhaps. Despite being protected in the US Embassy, he is still suffering. So those are the characters, the main characters at least, and so I hope that was useful. I've just got 2 more slides to show you. This is a character map. I have often done this with my own students. Um, if you look at the key, you've got the blue line, which are acquaintances, you've got the green line, which are friends, and you've got the red line, which is relationships through family or marriage. So this might be useful. I'm quite a visual person, and I like to see how characters are located in with each other. Sometimes these are useful. If you look at Amir and Hassan, they're right in the heart of this novel, because this is obviously a novel about them too, mostly, and arguably Sorab as well, and Asif. So that cluster in the middle there is the heart of this novel, from which everything else kind of goes out from. So if this was a kind of map of the cardiovascular system of the body, and these are all arteries and veins, Amir and Hassan would be the heart of this novel. So that might be useful. And finally, it's not just people that can be characters, it can also be countries. And of course, the main contrast in this novel is between Afghanistan and America. And sometimes these countries are personified. We often use pronouns like she and her to do with countries, motherland, fatherland, and so on. So thinking of countries as people or personified is nothing new. To talk about Afghanistan first, you've got a map there of some of the places which are mentioned in the novel. But Afghanistan, you could say, is personified as a victim of countless regime changes and political instability, right from the 60s and the bloodless coup of overthrowing the monarchy. It is a place that is presented as having quite a peaceful and harmonious past, a place of tradition, a place that's actually quite poetically described by Hosseini in those opening chapters, but a place that changes rapidly based on the countless changes of regime, a place that's harmed by foreign invasion or intervention, as well as its own nationalistic extremism, who claim to act in the best interests of that country. For example, the Taliban, who claim to put the best interest of their watan, their homeland, first, failing to realise actually that they're responsible for its suffering. So Afghanistan can also be personified as a victim, and of course what Hosseini wants to do is he wants to show Afghanistan as not just the war-torn place that you see on the news, but as a place that did have its character just like any other place. If you Google image Afghanistan, 9 times out of 10, the picture that you get would either be of the Taliban or of a war-torn landscape, and that's exactly what Hosseini is rebelling against. He's wanting to humanise that country. That is conflicted. Afghanistan is conflicted or contrasted with America as a political and social opponent to Afghanistan. Of course, America exemplifies a kind of living that the Taliban hates, resistant to Western views and Western democracy. That's obviously reminiscent in terms of the invasion of 2001 after 9/11. Which were trying to get rid of Al-Qaeda and also the Taliban. So America is the antithesis or the opposite of Afghanistan. However, for Baba and Amir, it is a place that rescues them and gives them new chances and also, importantly, survival. Amir, of course, has a lot to thank for Amir. And had Baba used welfare or used chemotherapy, it obviously would have offered them more than they actually got. It does create a sense of culture shock or alienation or homesickness because it's a very different place to live than Afghanistan. And America, again, used here, alluding to the US's history of taking in immigrants over the centuries. Just look at American surnames, for example. You will notice Italian or Spanish or, all kinds, French, Dutch, Eastern surnames, showing how America is actually made up of lots and lots of people that came to America at one point or another for a new life and a new chance. Perhaps you should research Ellis Island, which was a place where many, many immigrants entered the US by the Statue of Liberty. I've actually visited, and it's definitely reinforces to us how America is built on immigration. So in summary then, it's not just people that can be characters, it can also be the countries themselves. So that is a video all about the characters of the Kite Runner. I hope that's useful. And that is useful if you're studying the Kite Runner for A-level, for numerous different specifications. You might, for example, get a question about characters, or you might be asked to write from the perspective of a character with the Lang Lit spec. So in order to do that, you obviously need to know who the characters are. So thank you very much for watching, and good luck with your studies. Thank you.